Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? There is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. On our Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to an individual. His name is Freddy. He's out there from the great state of Washington. And he had listened to one of my Packwood, Washington episodes not too long ago. And then he heard how I was asking if anyone else had any encounters around that area. And so emailed me right after he listened to that episode. So Freddy, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Is there anything else that the listeners would need to know about your background before I have you go into your story of what you experienced out there in the woods?
Yeah, sure. I'm originally from down southeast, and I was born and raised down there in military and came up here. And in, I'd say probably late 90s was when I first moved up here. And to be honest with you, I really didn't know anything or that much about Bigfoot stuff at all. It's a lot more prevalent up here and a lot more interest in that. When all this came about with what happened with us, that was I just didn't really know what I was actually seeing or experiencing or hearing. Anyway, yeah, I've tried to keep this story to myself because the area was a hunting area, and how it is with guys that don't want to give up their hunting areas and that kind of stuff. But this happened around 2004. One of the reasons I'm okay with going ahead and talk about it is it's been 20 years. And so this happened a while ago. But also another site that corroborated my story on this was actually had already been posted in the location and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and divulge some stuff that normally I wouldn't have done, but it's already out there. So it's okay to talk about it. I just wanted to share my experience about what happened with my son and I on this little adventure. And yeah.
And Freddy, something I would request of you, just because I'm looking at a map, is if you could include what it took to actually get into this location, because it looks like it may have taken a little bit of work to get in there, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. This is an area the area is called Goat Mountain, and that area is mainly traveled by horse. It's a horse camp up above. And when you're coming into this area, you're entering it in through the Mount St. Helens area park area, but then you're eventually making your way back over into the forested national forest land, which is areas that you can hunt and that kind of stuff. So it's on the border. The first mountain you got to traverse up is really steep. I'd say that's probably a good 3.5, 4 miles straight up, and then another 3 miles down to some lakes that you can get to as well. A lot of people go up there for hiking. People fish up there a little bit. So there is a little bit of trout fishing up there. And yeah, I would say in total, coming from the base of this mountainous area is to the actual end resort, which is where we were camped out at a lake called Deadman's Lake. That's probably from the beginning of the trailhead to that lake is probably around 7 to 7.5 miles. I think it's about 7.5 miles, I think. All I know is hiking it and going that steep in elevation, it definitely feels like a long way. It's a pretty good hike. So the first probably 4 miles is pretty hard just because it's just going up switchbacks. And usually when I would go up there, because I used to go up there every year just about to hunt, we're carrying 50, 60, 70-pound packs, just depending on how much stuff we needed to get up in that area. Because usually when I would hunt up there, we'd be up there for about 5 days to a week. It just depended on my work schedule and all that. But this particular year, my son and I, he was 13, getting ready to turn 14. And this was his first real big hunt with me. I'd been hunting up there. Oh yeah, let me explain that too. I've been hunting that area since about 2000. A friend of mine that he flew aircraft and stuff, he knew this area pretty well and basically introduced me to this area. And so I'd hunted that area for a few years prior to me taking my son up there. And I went up there during archery season. So this was around, I'm guessing around September timeframe, 2004. And like I said, my son was probably close to 14. I was around 32 years of age at that time. And so a little more fit, a little more agile to get up in these areas. And so anyway, we packed up down below at the trailhead where the horse camp, one of the main start where people trailer out their horses to go up the trailhead. We made a base camp down there with I had a little tiny RV. I just kept down there as a base camp. And then the plan was to set the satellite camp up above at Deadman's and just camp there. Not really hunt there, but just camp there and then go out from there. Anyway, so we went up, we hiked up. It was, like I said, like you said earlier, it is not an easy place to get to. We had to try to beat the guys on horseback up there that morning. So we left out in the dark that morning to get up there and start doing some hunting we needed to get to Deadman's to set up camp. And so we were getting up there and we hunted, set up camp, was there overnight, hunted that night, that day, and then camped out that night at Deadman's Lake, and then went back up to Goat Mountain, which is an area that you can really visually see your area okay a little better. So we were up there looking, and we saw this guy walking down the horse trail. It's probably, it was at the top of Goat Mountain, so it was probably about 3 miles in from the trailhead. So we were right at the very peak, right at the top peak. And we see this guy walking towards us, and he's got a little rod and a fishing rod and just looking like he's just going to be a light camper. So we walk up to him and we're like, hey, and he was like, saw that we were archery hunting and we were just chatting back and forth. And I said, hey, we're camping out down at Deadman's. If you guys, just letting you know. And I said, there's nobody else down there. It's just my son and I. And he was like, oh, okay. So I'll see you maybe tonight or something. And we'll see if we can meet up for like dinner or whatever. Anyway, we just chatted for a little bit. And he said he was going to stay there for a couple days, like a few days. I'm not sure how many days, but he just said he's going to be there. So we hunted all that day, and that night we came in to camp, and I looked out, and probably about 200 yards away was his camp. So there was only him and then my son and I. So my son and I were in our campsite, and then he had his campsite probably close to 200 yards away around this lake. And to figure out logistically, we were closer to the main trail, and he was like further away from the trail. And he would have actually had to walk past us if he was going to come pack out or anything, if we were there. So anyway, another day goes by, we're hunting and doing our thing, and come back in really late one night. It was pretty late, and we hunted all day, and come back to the tent and fell asleep. I don't know, I'm guessing we probably fell asleep around 8 or 9, and woke up at about 9. I don't know, it's probably about 1. We woke up about 1 in the morning, and because I think I looked at my watch and it was right at just about 1 in the morning. And there was the most god-awful scream I'd ever heard. And it was only probably about 30 yards from us. It was really close. And when I thought, at first I was thinking, okay, maybe this is just a cougar, maybe this is just a bear or something like that. But the way that this thing made this sound, it didn't sound like a cat, because a mountain cat sounds more like a woman screaming or whatever. This one sounded very guttural, and it was a really long scream. It felt like it lasted like 5 seconds every time it would do it. And it did that a few times. And because we were up there archery hunting, and I was concerned, just to be honest, I had packed a small pistol on me just in case, for safety, of my son and I in case we ran across anything. Wasn't expecting that, and had pulled my pistol and was just waiting. And I could hear this thing walking up to our tent, and it was walking around us, and it didn't sound like a four-legged animal at all. And I, even telling this story is giving me chill bumps right now. It was, but it was screaming and yelling, and it was terrifying. You always think you know what you're going to do at that moment, but I honestly was freaked out, and I was trying to figure out a way. My son and I were both looking at each other because now we're both awake, and he's scared out of his mind, and I'm like going, what is this? And so I'm trying to figure out an exit way to get out of the tent and shine some light on whatever it is. But when it started walking around us, I was like, okay, I'm not walking out there. And so it came around and then walked back, and then it more or less disappeared after that. But the screaming and thing that this thing did was probably a good 15 seconds of it, maybe 20 seconds of yelling and screaming, and had a really high pitch, and then it went to a really low pitch. And that was really what was so, like, I could not figure out what kind of animal this would actually sound like. Anyway, we stayed in there, and we couldn't sleep the rest of the night. We were pretty much wide awake the rest of the night, just waiting and listening for anything to transpire. It did walk away. And so anyway, got up that morning and walked outside the tent, and I looked over, and the guy's tent that was 200 yards away from us was gone. His pack and everything was gone. And so anyway, I was kind of like, okay, well, that's weird. I saw him the night before. I saw his camp down there, and now he's gone. I'm like, when in the world did he leave? And so anyway, we went ahead. We stayed down there. We actually stayed for another day, and we were pretty nervous about staying, but we just did not know what it was, and we were just trying to figure it out. Well, anyway, the next day, we went out. We hunted all day again, came back to camp, and I'd asked my son to go to the lake to get some water, because we'd get water from the lake and boil it over the campfire, and that would be some of our drinking water, fresh drinking water. So he went down, and he comes running back, and he goes, "Dad, there's something by the lake." And it was looking at me. And I go, maybe it was just a barracuda or something. He goes, "No, Dad." He goes, "This thing was looking at me. It had a face," but he goes, "The closest thing I can make it out to be is it looked alien, but at the same time, I go, well, what did you see, its body or what?" And he was like, "No, I just saw his face, and he was looking at me." He was like behind a log or a stump. And I was like, yeah, okay, I think we're about done. So we ended up packing our stuff up and going ahead and heading back down. So anyway, we come back home. We told some of our friends and family the story, and they were just like, "Man, that sounds like a Bigfoot thing." And I didn't know really what they were talking about. I'd heard about Bigfoot, but not really too much. It's like I said, it's more Northwest. So I go, and I ended up running into my friend again. Actually, to fast forward a little bit, 3 years go by, okay? And I'm talking to the guy that he introduced me to the place, the guy that flew. And he told me, he goes, "You need to be careful going up there at certain times because you just don't know what you're going to get into." We were just talking about safety and stuff. And I go, "Yeah," I said, "I know." I said, "I've already had that one incident happen." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "I thought I told you that." And he goes, "No." And so I told him the story about what I just told right now. And he goes, "Dude, I totally believe in the Bigfoot stuff." And I was like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, I go, I don't know what it was, but it was very terrifying. And it walked around us. It sounded upright. Didn't sound like a four-legged creature or anything. And I go, I don't know. So he ends up jumping on the, I guess, BFRO, I think. And he found the other guy's story in our area. He was going on his computer, and he looked up the area that we hunt. And he goes, "Hey, look, man, there's another story up at Deadman's Lake." And I go, "What?" There is? He goes, yeah, it's right. He goes, dude, that's right where we camp. And I go, what is he saying? What was the year? And he goes, it happened in 2004. And I go, dude, that's when I was there. And so he clicks on it and he's reading the story, and his side of the story, I haven't read this story in a long time, but his side of the story was that he was going up there to go fish at Deadman's Lake, and he ran into a father and son archery hunting. We discussed talking about meeting one another, and it was the date and everything. Like, that was it. That was the story. And so that was the story from the guy that actually was there also. And so anyway, that guy ended up, according to if I remember correctly, because I haven't read this in a long time, was that as soon as he heard that screaming and yelling, he started packing his stuff and got out of there right then. He must have left there in the dark. And I'm telling you, this section of woods is pretty scary at night if you're going to be up there alone. And to pack out alone, he would have had to have been really terrified to have done that. That's not something that you would just want to up and do. It's a hard hike out of there. And for him to get up at 1 or 2 in the morning and to pack his stuff and leave before daylight, something spooked him as well, pretty bad. But the difference was he was still probably a couple hundred yards from it, and I was literally within feet of this thing. And I guess according to that thing, if I remember correctly, he said he knew that we were down there, I guess, but, he was getting out of there. So anyway, yeah, that's more or less what happened. I don't know if that's what my son actually saw at the lake, but whatever it was hanging around us.
I did look up the report as we were talking about earlier today. The way
really?
that he talks in it, he calls out in this report the same thing you did, which is the scream was predominantly a high-pitched scream, but he also noticed a low-toned vibe that seemed to be part of the scream as well.
It did. It was weird. It was so weird. It was extremely high, which at first made me think it was a cougar in the beginning. But then when it went into this real low guttural, I was like, no, that's not a cougar. That ain't no cougar. But yeah, to me, that's what I was expecting. But you're right. It was really high and then it went really low. So
the other thing that he points out is that it reminded him of a sound that he's heard gibbons make, which is interesting.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that's kind of...
See, I'm kind of ignorant to a lot of this stuff. Honestly, I hate to say that, but what you're hearing is straight up honesty from me on how this, as far as what I know. That's really, I don't know the differences in the Bigfoot and all that kind of stuff. But that is interesting. Like I said, I haven't read that story since 2007.
It might be that was the last interesting to check it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Another interesting thing he says, this other witness, is that he tried to get back into the area later on, but it had been closed down by the Forest Service due to activity around Mount St. Helens.
Oh, okay.
So that's weird.
That is weird because I didn't see that while we were there. I didn't see anything shut down. But see, we literally stayed there for an additional day. You know what I mean? We were there for 4 days, more or less. And so by the time we were seeing these other things and something else seemed really weird, we just decided we needed to get out of there because we were the only ones up there. And if we needed help, we would have been totally screwed.
Absolutely. You're so far out there, it's not going to be a good time. Did you hear any other animals or birds at the same time that you were hearing these screams, or was it just pretty much nothing?
Very thick
fir trees. Sorry, hold on. I apologize. The Bluetooth keeps, let me see if I can, the Bluetooth keeps having issues on this. It's very strange. Let me see if I can reconnect. Hello? Check.
Hello.
Hey, Freddy. Sorry about that. I have
All good.
no idea. Oh, there we go. Oh boy, it's going to be fun. I just have a few more questions for you.
Sure. Yeah, no, go ahead.
So the last question I'd asked was, do you remember hearing any sounds around the same time when you were hearing the screaming?
No, absolutely not. No, this area that we hunted in, it's a very dense fir tree area. These things are massive, and it's not like a home to a lot of small animals. Like, you don't see squirrels, you don't see any of that stuff in there. Don't ask me why, but there's just very low amount of wildlife in that, near that lake. The only thing I've ever heard down there before, and that was probably maybe a year or two before that, was I have heard an owl in there. I was walking down the trail one night and I was coming back at dark, and I heard an owl that was literally 10 feet from me that hooted at me. But there was a substantial difference between a scream and yell as opposed to a bird sound.
Sure.
This was no bird sound
Okay.
at all. I know that for a fact.
Absolutely. You had mentioned the sighting that your son had, and
Yeah.
I know you guys aren't researchers, but did you happen to go down to that area to see if there were tracks, or after it happened, you're like, you know what, let's get out?
Yeah. So I did. When he come running out of the woods, I went more or less running towards him to see if everything was okay. And he was like, "Dad, there's something over there looking at me." He goes, "I'm looking at its eyes. It's looking at me." And I went down there and I didn't see it. And he goes, "Dad, it was just there, I'm telling you." And he wouldn't have made that up. He's not that kind of kid. Not even from being scared from the other stuff. He just saw something and didn't know what it was. But no, when he told me that, I was spooked by then, and was enough to go, I don't want to camp out another night here and go through that again. We were going to go ahead and stay another following night, but I just was like, nah, I think we're just going to go ahead and head back. We're now up here alone by ourselves. And if in the event we did need help or anything, we would have been toast. I didn't want to endanger my son like that. It was bad enough being up there after that incident. But like I said, to be honest with you, I just was like, man, maybe there's another kind of an animal up here that I'm not aware of. But this thing does not sound like a cat, and it doesn't sound like a bear. I don't know what it is, but maybe there's just something I'm not aware of. And that's when, of course, later on, people were like, shoot, that was probably a Bigfoot. And I was just like, what? So it was kind of like, whoa, some of the things that people are talking about and saying, I wouldn't even tell somebody, oh, that didn't happen to you, because now that I've had it happen to me, I would say there's validity in everybody's experiences of what has happened to them on their own.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
All I can tell you is what happened to me and my son and the third party that was there. Yeah.
It was quite a few years ago. Over the years, have you looked to see if there's been other things that have happened in the same area or region that could be related to Bigfoot?
Not really so much. I haven't hunted up there in several years, probably at least 10 years or so. And not because I didn't want to because of that incident or anything. It was just, like I said, I'm getting older now, and it's just getting harder to hike into these areas. Like I said, they're a hard place to hike in. It's not too bad on a horseback or anything, but it's pretty steep terrain. I will say that there's been some weird things up there that we've gone into some areas hunting that was very in the thick, like in areas that I couldn't even imagine people going into. And doesn't mean that they haven't. Hunters can be pretty resilient to get in and around certain areas, but we've been in some areas that were pretty thick. And I've just seen like skeletons of animals, whether it be bear or cougar or whatever, or elk, actually elk and deer. And they're placed in like weird patterns and stuff. I thought that was weird. I've ran across that a few times. And I'm just like, man, I would be really surprised if somebody's been through some of these areas. Doesn't mean it's not possible, but I've just seen some things that was just really weird. Like, why are these things stacked a certain way and done this way out literally in the middle of nowhere?
Can So can you share what you mean by strange patterns of these skeletons? Or
Yeah, they were like just the way they were placed out. Like it was almost like they were purposefully laid out in a way, not laid out in a way as if something died and got just decayed and went to the ground. You can tell what that looks like. This looked like the bones had been specifically like moved around in places and formed into not really a design or anything, but just organized. It was weird. I've seen that before. And I just was like, man, as deep in the woods and as thick of the woods that we're in, we would sometimes get caught up into areas that me personally, I didn't even mean to get into. Sometimes you just start hiking into areas to look for these little side elk trails and stuff. And next thing you're in an area that you're like, I got to get out of here because I'm going to have trouble getting out of here myself. Because a lot of those ravines and stuff are so steep and they're hard to get into. And when at that time, I was in really good shape and I could hike and go up into these areas, no problem. But when you see something like spread out and laid out, and I don't know how I'd say a pattern. They just did not look like they died and naturally decayed right there. It looked like it had died and then something came in and shuffled their bones into a pile kind of, and it was just weird, very strange stuff. But so that, other than that, I haven't had too many other encounters up there. I've hunted up there for probably, I must have hunted up there for probably 10 years though, from 2000 all the way to 2010. But I did select after that incident though. I went up there. I was going to go up there with more people and also pick and choose my battles on making sure I had somebody with me or whatever. Because I used to like to go up there by myself, but it was just like after that incident, I probably am going to come up missing one of these days if I keep this up.
Which is not funny at all, but it's funny that you had that thought. No. Maybe I should not do this. I actually had a similar thought out in south of Oak Ridge when I went to a reservoir down there, and I was having supper by the side of this lake, and I was like, you know what? This is how people disappear. Maybe you should not be here, buddy.
Yeah, no, yeah. It definitely makes us question our sanity, what we want to try to do. But and in all honesty, if I had even known about this Bigfoot stuff at that time, it might have really made me think a little harder about it, going up there and hunting as often as I did by myself. But because I've tracked cougar and stuff up there, I've been around them. I know more or less what I'm hearing and seeing up there. That night was something I've never heard in my life. And really I can't expand on that enough. It definitely wasn't human. And to me, it missed the mark on cougar and bear. And those are really about the only other things that could be up there that could even remotely come close. But
because what a cougar sounds like, what a bear sounds like, and this was no bear. No, this absolutely.
Yep.
Lastly, the name of that area is weird in itself. Do you know anything about the history of it? Why it's called Deadman's Lake?
I would only be speculating, but I'd heard that it had something to do with when the volcano erupted. That one of the stories that I heard was it launched a guy into that lake. Now, whether or not that's true or not, I have no idea. That's just what I just heard, that it did have a bad ending from when the mountain erupted or something. But for all I know, that lake could have been named that before that time frame. Like I said, I'm not originally from up here. I've lived here since like 99. But as far as the far back history of it, I couldn't tell you.
It's a fascinating account, and it is so unique because it has that report from the other individual's viewpoint to go along with it, which I'll have linked in the show notes. And listeners, if you know the history of Deadman's Lake, feel free to put it in the comments, or have had an encounter in this same area of Deadman's Lake, please share that as well. Or share it and also send me an email, because that's how I keep track of stuff, and I'd love to talk to you. But Freddy, it has been just a privilege to have you on the show and for you to be able to share your story, and I appreciate you so much coming on.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If there is anything else that you run into in the future, or you hear anything else, feel free to to reach back out. I'd love to hear anything you run into up there, because I know the Bigfoot stuff is everywhere you turn.
Will do.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. And I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. These are all in Oregon, by the way. Oak Ridge, Dexter, Fall Creek, Deschutes National Forest area, Cultus Lake, Spirit Lake, Subtle Lake, McKenzie River area, Sweet Home area, the area west of Crater Lake, east of 230 West Diamond Lake Highway, and north of 62 Crater Lake Highway. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.